thus the truth. If you have a question this morning, or if you would like to relate your own experience, or want to speak about self-realization and what Sri Bhagavan has so graciously revealed, please at any point feel free to speak or to ask.
I've been continuing to read the procedural discrimination commentary. I don't remember the name of the one who wrote the commentary. It's the one downstairs, available in the bookstore. I've read the first section and going back to read it again because in the first section he really talks about the 4 requisites. Great depth. And it seems this is particularly important in practice. One of the things that I saw in the commentary that I hadn't understood as much before is how one leads to the other. That the discrimination, when it is deep, and the seeker starts to see the reality within instead of in those things in the world and in the actions and the fruits of the action that come back to some imagined individual, then detachment flows naturally, because how can you be attached to something that you see is not real? Likewise, once the detachment deepens, then sama comes naturally, and after, peace of mind, etc. I thought that, to me, that's interesting and instructive. It still focuses me back with more intensity on the discrimination. Because it says that for the process to deepen, the discrimination has to be complete, which certainly we've heard. I also have come to appreciate in yet another way Ramana's inquiry. As I read the Shankara's text, they talk about this a lot and still talk about inquiry as approaches to discrimination. But with Ramana's inquiry, it seems like it cuts through so much of this and focuses immediately upon identity, which is focusing immediately upon what is real. And again, what clarity and what a wonderful teaching, and what a wonderful way to focus, beyond the mind.
Whether we refer to this as discrimination, as inquiry to know the self, as inquiry to destroy the illusion, inwardly focusing, going beyond the mind, it amounts to the same. As for the 4-fold sadhana or requisites for self-realization, you may view them sequentially or as 4 ingredients that mingle together, are the qualities or attributes of successful and fruitful spiritual practice. What's most essential is to know yourself. He said to go beyond the mind. What is it that goes beyond the mind?
That in me, I see an inquiry, and I see not an inquiry, that there is something that is always there, that is always constant. The mind is not always there.
The mind is not always there, but that thing, which is you, is always there. So we can only loosely speak of going beyond the mind. That which goes beyond the mind is already beyond the mind. You can consider it like this, and I'm sure this is raised in Vivekachudamani as well by Shankar. The mind is said to be, as the Maharshi says, a bundle of thoughts, just all thought, that has a great variety of permutations. But are any of those thoughts you? Again, in Vivekachudamani and elsewhere in Vedanta teachings, the mind is spoken of as manas, chitta, and buddhi. Manas refers to those mental activities that deal with sensory cognition and associations with the same. The registration of sensation, which is actually just imagined in the mind, it is not external. And one's associations, this is good, this is bad, this is pleasant, unpleasant, painful, pleasurable, etc. Chitta is memory. Since memory, and the sense of continuity through time, since the thoughts of memory often go into the mix of our thoughts about the future, as well as the present thoughts, we can regard all such thoughts as the movement of chitta. Then there is buddhi. Buddhi is usually spoken of as intellect. We may understand it like this. It is that which seems to direct the focus or attention of the mind, as well as dealing with things that are non-sensory in character, more abstract thought, spiritual thought. It is also, as I just mentioned, that which seems to direct the attention of the mind, the focus. Yourself is beyond manas, chitta, and buddhi. How can that which is beyond the buddhi be reached by the buddhi? How can that which is beyond the intellect or mind be reached by the mind? As the Maharshi points out, the mind is itself inert. It is said in the text to shine by reflected light, which means it's inert by itself. Trace the light to its origin. The origin is consciousness. Consciousness is neither an object of the mind nor a director of the mind. Consciousness, being innately transcendent of thought, is that in which mind is non-existent. For the real does not subsist in the unreal, and the unreal does not subsist in the real. So consciousness does not become a mind, and there is no mind arising in consciousness. That consciousness is your real being. In being, there is no non-being. In the self, there is no non-self. And only the self is capable of knowing itself. Brahman alone knows Brahman. No other can do so because of the limitations, illusory, of that illusion, and because it is illusion. That which never is cannot know that which ever is. But if you discriminate like this through inquiry as to your identity, then you see the real alone is, and there's no second. That is the inquiry referred to, that is the discrimination referred to, and that is non-dual. Is this clear for you?
Yes, clear. Now, also in practice that you're reading and again seeing limiting adjuncts that I hold, I've gone back looking at senses again because you spoke of the manas, the projecting of through the senses, or the imagined projection through the senses. And I see some elements of this that are worth further examination to me. some of it turned out some of the senses, like the sense of sight, to me is not binding. It's obvious whether my eyes are closed, whether they're sight or not. It makes no difference in existence. Likewise with sound and these other seeming externalized kind of senses. There's still in me this internal body sense that I've spoken of before, that unlike the external ones, is more continuous, and I don't know how to close my internal feeling. And so...
Do you refer to the sensation of touch, or do you refer to the sense of being alive?
It's somehow, what it seems like is an internal body feeling. Internal body sensations is the only way I can describe it. When I was starting inquiry, one of the questions I asked myself is, how do I know it's me? As a form of the inquiry. And one of the ways I feel like I know it's me, is that it feels like me. If that makes any sense. And that actually is still something that is there, and at this point, that feels like me is...
But you know it.
But I know it.
And if it is the known or objective, how can it be you?
Exactly.
Have you ever had an experience without that particular feeling being present?
Oh, of course. Of course.
But you did not cease to exist.
Of course.
So where's the connection? Where can there be the identity of what you are with that sensation? You're not the body, and you don't have any of the attributes of the body. The limitations of the body, including its birth and death, are not yours. Similarly, you're not the senses. And anything having the attributes of the senses on the objective side, something sensed, or the supposed subjective side, the sensing entity, is not you. We were just speaking about the mind. Everything you know about the senses is contained in your mind. How can you be the content of something you're not? You need not try to maintain the sensation, nor do you need to cause a cessation to that sensation. Whether the sensation is there or not, you are. And it cannot exist apart from you. But you exist fine with or without it. If this as much is grasped fully, you're not bound by it. Will you be unhappy if the sensation goes away?
No.
Won't.
And having the sensation doesn't make me happy.
So it has nothing to do with your being, and nothing to do with your consciousness, and nothing to do with your bliss.
And though I say it feels like me, it's just a projection in my head.
Everything with which you've been misidentified at any time has supposedly felt like you. All you need...
Video game.
Okay. And all you need do is trace out from where the sense of identity derives. Just like when we're speaking of discrimination, you need only trace out from where does the sense of reality derive, so that you do not mix it up with objective or phenomenal illusions. Likewise with identity. If you go on tracing your identity, the one who traces is absorbed in that which he is trying to trace out. And that is pure being consciousness bliss. It is entirely free of the body, the senses, prana, or the sense of being alive, the energy of being alive, in any aspect of the mind. And it has no individuality to it, no ego sense. That can know itself. Indeed, that itself is the knowledge.
Clarification on something you said. Question. Pure consciousness and being is not mind, but it's not exclusive of mind. It doesn't have to be mind, it's in there. And part of our problem is because in between is, I'll use the Sanskrit word for truth, vijnana. And until we touch that, that's why we always have to leap across. What we see around us is an illusion, not because it's not real, but because we don't see it correctly. Isn't that true?
If we saw it correctly, how would we see it?
As ourself. Seeing is almost stops its identity.
All right.
And
the self is not multiple or divided.
And yet there's a truth to individuality.
In what does that truth lie?
In pure existence and consciousness.
Which transcends thoughts of individuality, division, or duality.
Right, well I have to use thought and words because I don't have vijnana to help out. And when we get to the state of pure being and consciousness, that's not the end. We don't cease to exist. And this universe doesn't cease to exist, so why?
Why what?
Why is it? Why was it? Did it manifest? Why did we come into it?
The ideas of us who come into it is not being identified with pure being and consciousness, but as something else. If that something else would be inquired into, the root of your question or doubt would be eliminated. You'd have the vijnana or awareness or knowledge for which you're looking. In that there is just the self. And to say it is all this or that none of this is and only that alone is, means the same thing. After all, when it is said Brahman is all this, it doesn't mean there should be any emphasis on all this. It means just Brahman is.
It's not an emphasis. It seems to me that what's the manifest is from Ananda. It couldn't be, it couldn't express itself otherwise, if it didn't have a delight behind it.
Delight is inherent in itself, but we speak of manifestation from some supposedly manifested point, not from the self itself. So the first thing to do is to realize the self, and then see if there's a universe or not.
Okay.
Otherwise, whatever be the definition of the viewer, it will necessarily get into his view.
But on the way, don't we have a responsibility for I don't know how to say it, responsibility to, if we hurt ourselves, we stop it usually, unless there's something wrong, and there is hurt going on and to not do something, evil succeeds when good does nothing. You can say there's no evil, but
It's not necessary to say that. Evil succeeds when good does nothing. Similarly, ignorance seems to prevail in one's own mind if one does not employ knowledge, which is wholly good. Knowledge alone destroys ignorance. Nothing else will do so, not another part of ignorance. That knowledge is rooted in yourself. That yourself, which is also knowledge, is the very root of everything that's true, good, and beautiful. When we find that root, we find that that alone is. And there is the utter destruction of the very cause of delusion, which in its grossest form manifests as what you call evil.
could you clarify that a little more?
What do you have a question about?
Yeah, the question that's hard to say is a good question.
Okay.
At some level, there has to be a necessity for what we call evil. That's not even right. What we call evil isn't evil, it's a consequence of being in ignorance.
Yes. The denser the ignorance, the cruder its form. When its form is very crudely manifested through the grossest of actions, you call it evil.
But isn't there a responsibility?
There's a responsibility to attain true knowledge, which is the very root of all that you call good.
Well, let's make it very practical. Someone comes up to us and says they're going to kill us just because they feel like it. What's our responsibility in that situation?
To abide as a mortal being, whether you choose to stop his action or not. Because going on with the delusion that you are mortal, that you are the body, and that you can be slain, well, that won't help the situation.
Don't have that delusion.
Okay.
But it's a choice to allow or not allow. You just can come back or not come back. But there's a loss in allowing if something can be done.
Yes, you're not required to be indolent. Knowledge is transcendence, not necessarily indolence. Is that what you're asking?
Okay.
We can look also, very practically, at the lives of those who have realized the highest truth. Even those like Shankara, the Maharshi, etc., who declare the self is, this whole universe is not. But if you look at their manifest lives, how much good is there?
We don't. It's hard for us to see all the good they do.
We could go on for eons trying to describe it, and it would not be adequate. And that in itself is standing proof of how this self, the knowledge of which we are concerned with, is the very root of all that is true, good, and beautiful.
And that's beyond those words.
It's beyond those words. It's all peace, but it is not indolent.
On Friday, we talked about it's like inquiry is a process of keeping the thoughts at bay. And what I notice when I inquire, there appears to be times, I'll just call it daydreaming, where it looks like thoughts sort of rose up and I became the thoughts. So then I started to look at, well, what is this thing that I'm calling veiling that appears to have changed my identity and covered up that deep experience of myself? So it's like, what is this thing that I'm actually saying can obscure the self? What is this veiling? So I noticed that it has some qualities to it. One is it's a memory. And it appears to be in this time called the past. So I really started to look at, does that actually, what is the substance of all that stuff? But it doesn't really seem to have much substance when I look at it clearly. And then the one who seems to have been veiled and the veil itself, they seem to collapse, and that whole thing is like being able to remember a dream when you're awake.
What are you looking for?
It's funny, it's like I'm looking for myself.
Are you looking for confirmation of your idea or realization of the self?
It's confirmation of some idea.
And if you get that idea confirmed, what happens then?
Not much.
Okay, let's go back to where you first started. You first spoke about keeping thoughts in abeyance. Actually, what was said Friday evening when we were reading the Maharshi's words is that keeping off thoughts refers to being transcendent, undefined by any thought, and has little to do with the increase in number or decrease in number of thoughts.
Okay.
That's the first point.
Okay.
Question?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like that's so important that. Okay, so when you say that, there's something in me that goes, now wait a minute, I got this idea that I need to get rid of the thoughts, and like, you know, it's like there's a hole in the ground with water coming out of it called thoughts, and I got to put my foot on it.
No, it's a mirage, and the number of thoughts you have is like counting the waves, fewer or greater in the mirage, thinking the desert sand is getting wet, and you're drowning in it.
Okay, what you just said pointed out something that I consider real.
And when you consider something real and try to eliminate it at its own level, the most you can hope for is a change in phenomena, in this case subtle phenomena called thought. The realization of the true self comes about by discerning what is real. Implicit in that is a negation of all that is unreal. It does not come about by monkeying around with the unreal.
With the plumbing. Okay.
With the plumbing in the mirage.
Yeah. Where's that?
Turning on and off the valves of the water mirage.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay. Is this clear?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, the second point is you're describing your experience and how you traced it to a kind of memory. The experience is good, but you will probably find it more fruitful if you examine how you've put together the causality. Any description of illusion is necessarily as illusory as the illusion itself, and in your attempt to define it, it is purposeful only to the extent that it helps you eliminate it. to that extent, any explanation, no matter who gives it, of how duality or illusion or ignorance comes to be, will have its limitations. The limitations being of the illusion itself. If you say there's memory, and then veiling comes about, whose memory was it? Does the true self have a memory? The space-like, timeless, locationless, unborn, uncreated reality has a memory? Not so.
It doesn't have mirages in it.
If you speak of multiplicity, or the projection, in this case, mental projection in the form of memory, of whatever kind of memory, coming prior to the veiling, the causality is somewhat inverted. It would be better to say that there's veiling, and because of veiling, there is then the projection of the illusory multiplicity. You can see this in your everyday experience. In deep sleep, there is no projection of multiplicity. No body, no world, no mind, no experience of any of that. But there is veiling of your real nature. Out of sleep comes dream, and one of those dreams you call waking. Out of veiling comes the projection of multiplicity, which is an illusion.
Okay, I can see that the veiling occurs and then there's a projection that I'm calling a thought, some kind of memory. What I don't see is...
With the idea of time superimposed on it, you then call it in the past or memory.
Yeah. What is this thing that I'm calling veiling? What is that?
The same as the one who has it. We can call it misidentification or non-perception of your real identity, your real existence. The Maharshi says that of all such vrittis or modes, the root is the I. It is the assumption of existing as an individual prior to the idea of any attribute of that individual. There is one, it appears, who is to experience whatever the objective or this aspect of the experience will be it memory or anything else. And it is he that appears as a veil for himself, while your real being shines self-luminous, without a veil and without division, always. Inquire into that one. If there's a veil, the veil is for me. Who is that? If you inquire in this way, you will find there is no substance out of which to create the veil. You cannot make darkness out of light.
It's real clear that there is a tendency of Jim to explain things and then want to think that the explanations are real. and that there's some value in those. And you pointed that out. It's like a searching, but it's searching in a dream world by a dream character.
The search is right, but just how will you fulfill it?
By finding out who's searching.
So if the fourth of the requisites, the desire for liberation, that search, is turned in on the one who appears as if bound, liberation will be self-revealed. So the Maharshi says towards the conclusion of the book, Who Am I? When asked, well, in the question-answer format, it's put as a question, what is the nature of release or mukti, liberation? He says, to inquire and know the nature of the one who is in bondage is release or liberation. Why did he say that?
Why did he say it? So the guy could get free.
Yes, but it's also because there's only one self, there are not two of you. If there's a veil, there must be a veil between what is veiled and the one for whom there is a veil. That threefold division is not true. How can there be a veil for yourself? If it were another to be known, you might know or not know it. But in the case of yourself, how can you not know yourself? It is as absurd as saying you could not, there'd be a time when you would not exist.
That really is absurd. That's what veiling is saying, I didn't exist for a while.
And then you're there to report on it, I see.
That is very absurd.
However you wish to explain ignorance or illusion, it is fine as long as it prompts you to inquire, to uproot the very idea that such a thing exists. In other words, however you explain your bondage, which is not really true, it is all right if it prompts you to inquire and find out how you have not really been bound. You have not become a separated individual being, but you exist only as being, which is unborn, undivided, with no form. Clear?
Yeah, it's all about inquiry.
There's no substitute for knowing yourself.
Yeah, it's pretty fundamental.
Oh, you've now become a fundamentalist. All right.
I didn't think that would happen.
Thank you, Master. Often when your instruction includes a mention of inquiry fulfilled being realization itself, it makes me wonder, I hope in a good way, how the sages use words. The words are limited, but when they say, consider the nature of existence, the nature of consciousness, the place of, the source of. Well, I think the place and the source of it is almost another question. What I'm curious about is the nature of. I'm also curious about the other one, but it seems to be an inward turning for me when I try to get a sense of what does knowing mean? What is the nature of consciousness, and how it must be that reality, if it is existing, must know itself, and so that if I inquire, I'm turning towards reality which knows itself. Because if it, and in a way, the ego could almost be defined as an illusion that doesn't know itself. So that the knowing itself seems to be, for me, a way of understanding the identity of existence and consciousness, because the knowing of itself is the essence of real existence.
You've answered your own question splendidly.
I'm trying to take the hints of the words of the sages and see where they're pointing to. That's
To that.
I could compare it to taking such, deep words for granted, where I just assume that, knowing or consciousness is something fully understood, but I try not to, and try to say, well, what is the nature of knowing?
All right. And when you so inquire, what is your experience?
Well, at the very least, it seems like a very inward direction.
All right. So the words of the wise serve that purpose, to turn you in an inward direction. In the inward direction lies silent truth. The words of the wise shine with the power of silent truth. Silent truth is comprehended, as was explained earlier, by the silent truth itself. So that there is no distinction between the wise and their wisdom, or between the one who instructs and the one who receives instruction. So that the teacher, the teaching, and the taught are all one and the same thing. The teaching is not a set of ideas. The one who instructs must necessarily be identified with that. Otherwise, how will it be clear instruction? And the one who understands, he himself is that, which is the significance of the teaching. Hence the Upanishad says, Tattvamasi, that you are. With that aphorism itself being the instruction.
So if an aspirant felt that there was understanding in part and not understanding in part, then the practice would be to inquire and eliminate what seems to be the not understanding.
All right, and how would he do that? Doesn't his non-understanding have its basis in what he regards as himself? So he would discern what he defines himself as, and then inquire to discern whether the definition is true or false.
And on the other side, the partial understanding should be encouragement and a source of intensity for continuing to go in.
Yes, it seems that way at the outset, but really that which is true is self-evident. And even if we speak of what we know, but know partially, and there's still some ignorance mixed in, that which is true is self-evident and does not really need strengthening. Your effort is primarily the destruction of ignorance. Knowledge being the substrate is already solid. If it seems as if knowledge is unsteady, it is really the unsteadiness of ignorance prevailing. That is the cause. We destroy the ignorance. The knowledge is said to become strong. Because of the long-standing habit of regarding himself as an ego entity or a bound individual, the wise in the scriptures say you make the knowledge strong because you're looking at it from the perspective of being a non-knower. But how do you make the knowledge strong? By inquiring to know who the knower is. In doing so, the ignorance is shattered. That which is changeful is that which is unreal. The unreal alone can be destroyed, and the changeful alone is changed. The unchanging reality, which is the abode of knowledge, seems to get steadier. It is really unmoving. If you examine your experience, you'll see that you are unsteady at those times and proportionate to your misidentification. If the misidentification is concerning being, you'll take an I, an ego, to be real, or I am the body idea will be there, or I am in a body and such. If the misidentification, again, concerns your own consciousness, you will take a mind to be existent when there's no such thing. Likewise, sensing. And if the misidentification involves the ananda aspect or bliss, you'll become attached to something in an external world that is really only imagined in your own mind. Such seems to create unsteadiness in truth, but the truth doesn't become unsteady. To regain your innate steadiness, destroy the illusion. Is this partially understood?
I think I fully understand that. Partial understanding has to be removed.
Okay. That's good. Go ahead, Eric.
You know, it seems like that, you know, we've had conversations where I'll have a deep experience and then I'll say, but. So, you know, and you've said, okay, well, look into the one who can have that but, or, you know, directing the mind inward. And so, you know, because I've been trying to investigate the sense, you know, of I, this seems to be a little more formless, but it actually isn't that, because it seems like it always has trails behind, right? There's always something that you could trace it back inwards from. In other words, that but, or some sort of mind being created. So anyway, I'm just sort of looking at that, noticing, oh yeah, it actually has something that can be eliminated.
All right, so the Maharshi says that The ego is a ghost with no form of its own, but it feeds on forms. But when sought for, it runs away.
But it seems like if it leaves a form, it's good to eliminate that as a possibility.
Yes, your inquiry should always be thorough. Both the ego notion and the apparent objective definition form, what seems to trail behind it, should all be eliminated. How would the trail remain if there's no one who has it?
Yeah, it wouldn't be possible.
And if you do not allow for the trails, how will the thing, a ghost with no form of its own, survive?
Yeah. So there's sort of that link, right? Because, and I don't remember where I heard this, but it seemed like it's the ability to inquire actually comes down to how little your mind is going outward. In other words, if your mind's going outward, there's no way you can look deeper at yourself. And I've been...
Isn't it the other way around? If you're looking at yourself, there's no way your mind goes outward.
Yeah. Okay.
Since outward is, in reference to what we were talking about before, a projection of illusion within the mind itself, which is then erroneously regarded as external.
Okay, so I guess I noticed that for myself when I say I want to find out who I am. That ability seems to get better as I eliminate more stuff, more objective stuff. So my mind just becomes more focused, more clear. You know, but then there's, it just seems like it could be more focused, right? So it's just a matter of eliminating more stuff, I guess, continuing to look.
When you focus, is it a matter of thinking a particular way, or is it something deeper?
The essence is always deeper. I guess because the focusing sort of is it a byproduct? I don't know. Maybe it's a byproduct of the intention.
The thoughts may coincide or express the essence, but is the essence a thought, or is it something else?
Yeah, the essence is deeper than thought, because that'd be no good. That'd be part of the thing that's being eliminated.
And there'd be no freedom or real bliss in that.
Right. Okay. But it seems like it's a byproduct, right? Because it seems like, is that true? That there's always focus when, it seems like a lot of time it goes hand in hand, but maybe it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't always, right? Because sometimes the truth comes shining through even when the mind isn't really focused on.
So concentration or focus, in as much as we regard that as a particular line of thinking, is not the determining factor of knowledge, is it? When you inquire, is it because you think along a particular line? Does that constitute the inquiry, or is something else occurring?
I still believe that. It's, it's thinking along a certain line.
But what is your experience? Is that true?
No, it isn't true. It just...
You just made quick work of your belief.
No, but, because how, I guess there's no way, what is, because that's exactly what's trying to be jettisoned, is the whole objectification. That's part of it.
Okay.
So
and where does your belief...
That's focusing itself is part of the... It's not necessarily a problem in the sense that it can obstruct what's real, because it doesn't seem to. But it's not...
Is there anything obstructing realization then? Your belief has its power rooted in yourself. That is one reason why belief can be a wonderful thing. What obstructs realization? What makes you think you're not realized? Or what makes you think that there is someone, you, that is an unrealized entity or being?
You want the list?
Mm-hmm, all of it.
It's sort of like fictitious, puffs. Poof. It doesn't last very long, so it's. I mean, they don't hold up, So I could list things, but they sort of, don't have much weight, or it doesn't even look that interesting.
How can an uninteresting, fictitious, ephemeral puff, as you put it, be an obstruction to realization of the self?
Well, maybe that's the way all illusion is. I mean, it really is pretty boring, right? Number one. There really isn't anything juicy or great in it.
Right, there's no happiness in it.
There's something good, maybe. But,
okay, so it's juiceless.
Yeah, and you can define nectar there.
No. Nirasa, juiceless, essenceless, tasteless.
Unreal.
And yet I still, for some reason, believe there's reality, myself there. It seems like...
What is the basis of that belief?
Always goes down to myself. The basis has to be myself.
How can you yourself be an obstruction of your own realization of your own self? It appears as that because there is nothing else. But how can that be occurring? How can the unborn give birth to illusion?
bad habit? I don't know. I mean, really,
Habit has to be for someone. Whose habit?
Yeah, because it can't be for anything grosser. That wouldn't make sense, right? It wouldn't be for the body. It wouldn't be for the mind, right? Because those are, even though it seems like it partakes of the mind.
All that is imagined. You do not become this thing or that thing. You cannot be this or be that. Just being alone is.
न म्रिये न च जीवामि नाहं सन्नाप्यसन्मयः अहं न किञ्चिदिति मत्वा धीरो न शोचति.
I do not die and I do not live. I am neither existence nor even of the nature of non-existence. I am not anything of consciousness. Thus, having understood the self-possessed one, the wise one, the intelligent one, does not grieve.
Alepahoham ajaro niragashantavasanaha niramshosmichidakasham iti matvana shochati.
Stainless I am, undecaying, passionless, tendencies made tranquil, at peace, partless. I am the space of consciousness. Thus, having understood, one does not grieve.
Aham matya virahita shuddho buddho jaro maraha shantas shamasambhasa iti matva na shochati.
With the I thought abandoned, free from the I thought, pure, awakened, undecaying, unaging, deathless, peace, the light of tranquility and equipoise. Thus, having understood, one does not grieve, or, with all fallacious appearance tranquilized. Thus, having understood, one does not grieve.
Trunagveshambare bhano naranagamareshu cha yastishtadittadevaham iti matva na shochati.
I am indeed that which stands at the top of a blade of grass, in the sky, in the sun, in man, in the Nagas, and in the immortals. Thus, having understood, one does not grieve.
Bhavanam sarva bhavebhyah samutsrujya samuttitaha avashishtam param brahma kevalosmiti bhavaya.
Completely abandoning, pouring out all conceptions about existences, states, ways of thinking, completely rise up for the meditation, for being, that which remains the supreme Brahman, that which alone is, I am, thus.
Vacham atita vishayo vishayashadashochitaha paranandara sakshubdho ramate swatmanatmani.
Beyond what is the sphere of words, with abandonment of attachment to worldly pursuits, unagitated by, unmoved by, or not hungering for the essence of supreme bliss, one delights by his own self in the self.
Sarva karma parityagi nityatrupto nirashrayah na punyena cha papena netarena cha lipyate.
One who has abandoned all karmas, actions, eternally, ever satisfied, contented, the supportless, by virtue, merit, and sin, demerit, and by anything else is not tainted.
Spatika pratibimbena yatha nayati ranjanam tajña karma phalenanta tatha nayati ranjanam.
Just as by a reflection the crystal does not arrive at, come near to, being colored, so the knower of that does not become inwardly colored by, does not inwardly delight in, the fruits of karma.
Viharanjanata vrinde deha kartanna pujanaihi khedahladau na janati pratibimbaggatairava.
The knower removed or in a multitude, with the body cut or worshipped, is neither afflicted or in gladness, as he knows that such are as if by the approach of reflections.
Nistotro nirvikarascha pujya puja vivarjitaha samyuktascha viyuktascha sarvacharanayakramaihi.
He does not praise, is not modified, and is devoid of the worshipped and the worship. He is connected to and detached from all good conduct and custom.